webinar that I am going to hand over to Alex, not here momentarily, but wanted to thank you all for joining. Alex is going to walk us through some housekeeping and information so that you can make sure you get your CPE credits and everything. We'll go through some intros and agenda and that sort of thing, and then we'll kick it off. So with that, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. Would you like to kind of kick it off here and walk us through some things?
Yes, thanks. Yes, so a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the actual discussion today. Any questions and comments that you have throughout the presentation can be added to Zoom's chat feature. So we do want to keep this collaborative. We know that AI is still relatively new and ever changing, so we're learning too. So please, let's make this collaborative, be engaging, add any questions or comments that you have in the chat throughout the presentation today. If you do have a question that comes through kind of toward the end of the period that we have today and we don't get to an answer in time, we will send out those responses at the conclusion of the webinar to you. And then alongside that, after the conclusion of the webinar, we will send out a copy of the presentation slides, the link to the replay of this webinar, and any CPE certificates that you might earn today. Then around CPE, this qualifies for 1 CPE credit in the field of information technology. To receive that credit, you must be logged onto the Zoom for a minimum of 50 minutes and answer 75% of the polling questions that we have today. Just a quick kind of agenda, some of the discussion topics that we'll be talking about. First, we'll get into some introductions. I know that Em and I haven't fully introduced ourselves yet. And then we'll get into the forecasting challenges that we see in finance, then move into the role of AI in revenue forecasting. And then we'll end with how we can automate those revenue processes with AI, like what we've learned about AI, how we can apply that and operationalize it in your revenue processes. So my name's Alex. I am the solution consultant here at SOFTRAX. Mostly what I do is I partner with our sales teams for technical discovery and for demonstration of the revenue management software. But prior to coming to SOFTRAX, most of my career was spent in finance and accounting functions. So it was actually an early in career program where every 6 months we'd rotate to different functions of finance. So have been in every area from OpEx and corporate finance to P&L forecasting at the product level, to a little bit of deals desk, worked with sales operations and discount guidance, but most of the time I'd spent in revenue accounting. So that's kind of my expertise and why I came over to SOFTRAX, which I'll explain a little bit more about SOFTRAX in a bit as well. But throughout all this, I've always had a passion for process improvement and automation. And so that's part of the reason that I've been involved with OTTO-MATES. And so Em, I'll let you introduce yourself a bit.
Thanks, Alex. Hey, everyone. For those whom I haven't met, there's actually names that I know and names I don't know. But for those I don't know, I'm Em Daigle. I am the founder and chief automation officer of OTTO-MATES. We are a community of accounting and finance professionals where we come together and explore together all things automation and AI. So it's a super exciting time. I feel very lucky that those are my days. Started out my career way back in the day when it was the big five. So go ahead, you can do the math and guess my age, or a minimum age, I should say. Then went into industry for a number of years, kind of like Alex, saw all parts of the balance sheet and P&L across accounting and finance teams. Definitely got into Rev Rec, which is, dorky as it sounds, passion of mine, and ended up going to Zora on the go-to-market strategy side for a little over 6 years back when they had acquired RevPro, and then went to Clarity, Document AI. They've kind of shifted a little bit, I think, in their focus, but also got to have my hands in the AI world and felt like this was a great time to start a community so that together we can all explore what that means and get some real-time or real-world firsthand insights from one another about what works and what doesn't. So really excited and grateful for the SOFTRAX sponsorship that we have of the community, and always learning a lot from Alex and the team at SOFTRAX, and super excited to be here. So thanks, Alex.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Em. Going to give a brief overview of SOFTRAX. We sell our revenue management system, or RMS, which centralizes the revenue operations all the way from the order to cash cycle. So we emphasize complex billing models. We have, subscription billing, usage billing, and milestone billing capabilities, contract renewals, and then really we're purpose-built with ASC 606 and IFRS 15 accounting guidance in mind for the revenue recognition side. So where we see a lot of our customers utilize the platform is with multi-element arrangements, performance obligation management, standalone selling price revenue reallocations, and the revenue implications that come with some more complex situations like midterm contract modifications and things like that. So manages and automates that whole process, also has lots of reporting and analytics capabilities. But we are, this is a very interesting topic for me because this is what I'm talking to a lot of customers about on a day-to-day basis who currently work in finance and accounting and looking for ways to automate, especially in the world of AI. But anything you want to add from the automate side?
Yeah, not really, other than for those today that are listening, this is all very much, I'll say, again, in the same light that we're trying to do with automates, but just sort of like everything that we're hearing. So these will be insights both from myself as a practitioner, also in talking to so many of the members of the automates community, and also getting the opportunity to talk with vendors about what they're doing with AI and automation. And also Alex from her standpoint as a practitioner, but also in talking to prospects as well. So we're kind of running the gamut here on all things AI with predictive AI, I should say, with forecasting. And I think what you'll probably hear as we talk through today is a lot of it is just shared learning that we're all kind of coming together and figuring out what works and frankly what doesn't. And kind of hearing about what's out there in the market so that hopefully that will help you all at least be a little bit more informed about what else is out there and what's being kind of talked about in the art of the possible.
Exactly. So speaking of, we will get into kind of the first discussion topic, which is the forecasting challenges that we've seen as in finance as practitioners, like Em said, but also from our network and people we talk to. Before we get into that, though, we want to do our first polling question. So just to understand where everybody is at today, the first polling question is, what does your revenue forecasting process look like? So everything from extremely manual, this might look like all spreadsheets, lots of manual inputs, a combination of manual and automated, but still maybe more on the manual side, then maybe more automated. Maybe you've implemented some systems that can automate some revenue processes, but still have that manual judge or something, some element in there that you need to go in and update. And then extremely automated, which I'm seeing the results starting to come in, and we don't have anybody in that category yet. It does not surprise me. We'll get into a lot of the forecasting challenges that come with revenue forecasting, but in my experience, at least, I'm not surprised to see there are nobody in the extremely automated state.
Absolutely. So actually, Alex, I just shared this as well. It's funny just so that everybody kind of can understand what we've kind of gone through too, as well as we're pulling all of this together. But we started out and had fully automated, thinking, oh, no one would pick that. But it's interesting that we changed it to extremely automated and still it is not selected. So I don't think it's anything shocking, but certainly I think what that does help us understand is there's lots of opportunity for just even more automation and AI to help out in our processes today.
Yes, exactly. So when we start talking about the forecasting challenge in finance, this is obviously multifaceted, and it looks different for every company, every size, every industry. And forecasting, I think we all know, isn't just about math now. It's about managing the complexity and the timing and the expectations that come into revenue projections. Again, this could be internal, that we can control, but it can also be these macroeconomic external factors that we're seeing more and more of, I'm sure, these days. And so a lot of the kind of traditional models that we as finance and accounting professionals have put together, whether that's looking at just a historic run rate to predict revenue, or just Excel models that we can manually refresh, that can't keep up with the pace of these modern revenue models. So there's all these different levels to it, the complexity of timing of maybe deferred revenue schedules, maybe having to, it's not, an even recognition over time, but there's some factors or event-based recognition involved, or renewal uncertainty that goes back to kind of the macroeconomic factors maybe. So there's so many different kind of components to it. And when we're considering also different revenue mixes, different revenue streams, I'm going to ask you, in your experience, when you talk to people in your network, or maybe in your own personal experience, but how does that impact managing forecast processes for each type? So maybe a subscription-based revenue or service-based revenue, are some more predictable than others, or what are your thoughts on that?
So I think, well, and having had the firsthand knowledge and experience with it, I think subscriptions are pretty straightforward. As long as you've got something term-based, a start date and end date, there's pretty much a ratable pattern there, unless you're in a multi-element arrangement situation, where then of course you've got potential, I'll say, other performance obligations that might require you to pause on starting that. But at the end of the day, it's pretty straightforward. Even if you're in a spreadsheet, it's pretty easy to do. But then you've got things like contract mods that can throw everything in, like when you have upsells and downsells and churn, and I'm probably telling everybody here all the things that they already know and feel, that increases that complexity of something that's very seemingly straightforward. But I think when you get into some of the other things, like a service-based or project-based type of revenue pattern, it's obviously a lot harder to forecast. And I think part of that just comes in the unknown of maybe when that service is going to be performed, or when that project is going to be completed, or maybe it's milestones along the way. But that data also typically lives somewhere else. And so not only are you having to try and figure out what the timing of that, but also identifying where it's coming from and making sure those folks that are tracking those types of, I'll say, deliverables or hours, whatever it might be, are also entering them. And you don't always have, obviously, the control over or when they do that. But I think probably what I've seen is most difficult or challenging, and especially more prevalent as well, is like the consumption-based models, where it's feeling nearly impossible to predict a lot of times, unless it's a very strict model of, you can use this amount. But the second you get into like minimum commits or overages, or you can roll forward an allotted amount of whether it's tokens or runs or whatever your usage-based model is. That's where I think there's a lot of difficulty just in the forecasting, but it all kind of comes back to this idea of like where that data is located, how readily accessible it is, and how easy it is to like reconcile it at the end of the day. So, I think there's obviously a lot of complexity there that kind of like, the more models you have, obviously, the more complex it's going to be.
Yeah, that's getting the systems involved in data sources is a whole different conversation as well. It adds so many different levels of complexity to it, even outside the actual, kind of factors that go into putting together a forecast. We have the infrastructure of it, and we also have the complexity of the revenue itself. So it's really interesting. And I feel like, at least in my experience, when I was in a forecasting role before, because you have so many different factors and so many different systems or revenue streams, a lot of times we as accountants fall into the spreadsheet trap of, oh, I can just do this. I can do this in spreadsheets and put it all together in one place. And even if it takes a little bit longer of time, at least I know how it works and I can put it together. So that does make things more manual, more time consuming, etc. What have you seen as like the biggest pain points around doing things manually in Excel, some of these manual steps of the forecasting process?
It might be hard to find the biggest, only because I think there are so many, but there's a few that very easily come to mind. I personally have a love-hate relationship with Excel. I think, I mean, if anybody's heard me before, like I literally keep my grocery list in Excel because that's the love part of it. But the hate part is when I need to do something like forecasting, or really anything accounting related that is supplemental or even a full process. But I think there's certain things just like formula breakdowns or version control issues. Like I am the queen of not even realizing, putting something down on top of my laptop and then suddenly I've hit keys and trying to find my way back. Um, and then you've got the whole consolidation aspect. So like I call it like copy paste wars, where you are literally copying and pasting data sets from different systems because you've got to be able to get a complete data set to be able to do that. And of course, you might miss something. Maybe the report didn't run and you thought it was, but it was an older version of such said report where you're taking that data from. So every time you need to take those manual steps to consolidate all of that, it's room for error, right? And then by the time that you've gone through all those steps and validated everything and done the reconciliation, a lot of times you're done for the period, but then all of this activity has actually occurred since then. So now you're chasing the numbers as opposed to like staying ahead of them because you're always going and grabbing data from the past, as opposed to like that real-time data and being able to like really pull together real-time insights.
Yes. Yeah. And I see that a lot. And there's this almost, I can't think of the word for it, but this illusion of, well, I have more control over it because it's in Excel, when really
Mhm.
that's not always the case, because like you said, you have version control issues. It's not real time because there's so many manual steps to get everything in a consumable place. I will say I will probably regret putting this out there, but early in my career, I ran into an issue with doing so many manual processes, and you said that it's prone to error. There was one forecast cycle where forgot to refresh one pivot table out of hundreds, and
Mhm.
swung our forecast way out of line of where it should have been. And it's a rookie mistake, but things like that happen when we think that we have this element of control in spreadsheets, and it's just not built for these robust models of revenue forecasting.
I wish
Um,
I could say that never happened to me, but I think it's happened to pretty much all of us in some capacity.
yes, yes, and you just hope that it's not material, right? Or hope it's not
Exactly.
in part of the financial statements. This is internal, luckily, but you
Spot
never know.
on. Yep.
One thing that is also worth bringing up in terms of forecasting challenges is disparate systems and communication, maybe cross-functionally. We worked in accounting and finance, and we have our own forecasts for maybe different areas of the business or different geographies, or in my experience, it was product lines. But also we have, the sales function is doing their own forecasts for top line growth. And how often do you see those conversations kind of cross-functionally going well, not well? What is your experience in that area?
Well, so I think first and foremost, without those teams being aligned, it's really difficult. I've worked in organizations myself where those teams have been uh, not cross-functionally aligned, very separated. It becomes really difficult. And sales always tends to be optimistic, and finance comes with like the reality check. And then there's always some discrepancy where people are in disagreement about what that looks like. And so then you spend all of this time trying to reconcile the data. Like, where did your forecast come from? Where is this forecast coming from? How do we bridge the two together? But in the organizations I worked where those teams were super aligned, it became so much easier. And I think one of the things that we're going to get into here shortly, and I know we have to move this along because we have so many great things to talk about,
We could
but
talk about this for
I was going to say the
hours, just
problem is there.
rehashing the challenges,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. But I think there's something to just like how much time you're spending on all of this. And like I hear all of this commentary about like, we spend a third of our month on variance explanations, and that it's just not sufficient because we're spending all of this time doing that. There's always this pressure to produce the numbers faster. And so that becomes really difficult as well. And then there's always like, they want to be like, we want to be spending more time doing things like scenario modeling where we can help the business, but there just isn't enough time. And so this might be a good segue. I know teams are like kind of like stuck in reactive modes, but I wonder if this is kind of like a good way to get into the next section in the interest of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we can get into kind of how I agree also with that kind of reactive stance. I say this all the time when I'm talking to prospects is that you always have this feeling for both forecasting, but also revenue recognition of something changes in the business, new monetization model, maybe new product offering from an acquisition. And we as the accountants have to react to, okay, well, how do we actually appropriately recognize this revenue or forecast for it when, of course, do new go-to-market strategy and improve the top line and look for growth, but we always kind of get that back seat. And so I say we,
I
formerly,
know.
but you can sense the PTSD there. But looking at that, trying to look at how we can be more proactive as finance and accounting professionals, I do think AI is one of the ways that we can. So that leads us to our second polling question here. Want to also kind of do a pulse check. How advanced is your familiarity with AI, and then how it can help your accounting and finance teams? I think everyone on the call knows AI is a big buzzword. I think at this point, everybody knows that it's helpful and important, and it's the future. And so I don't think this is this is not a webinar that's convincing you AI is good for business. I think we all kind of understand that, but what is your familiarity with how it can specifically help your accounting and finance teams? And I'll be the first to say, when I was working in finance and accounting, AI was not really a thing yet. We'd heard about it. You might have used ChatGPT in your personal life, but it had definitely not been rolled out internally for the finance and accounting functions at my previous company. And so I would really fall in thinking, kind of in the middle here, familiar, maybe even on the somewhat familiar side, just because it is ever changing and it's so new.
Yeah, and so I just shared the results here, and nothing here is really that shocking. And I think, I see like 44%, is that like somewhat familiar? And I think that's because we've gone from like skeptical to cautious and maybe curious, but maybe not necessarily full on ready to adopt. But I think this actually today, as we go through, is a good opportunity to start thinking about where you can use AI in a way where it's not necessarily driving your financial results output, but helping along the way with some of the things that really are more challenging. And so we can kind of like go through what that looks like a little bit more here. But I think this is probably a clear indication that we're probably on the right track here for the things that we're going to be walking through, given this sort of poll output for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't have any AI experts who have it all figured out on the call, and that's comforting to me. So
I don't think anybody is really an AI expert in accounting and finance, although Ray's saying he's in the community. If anybody's part of the community, he's like a genius when it comes to this stuff. But other than that, I think we're all still kind of figuring it out together.
Exactly. And you brought up kind of we're moving a little bit farther away from skepticism. I think that it's important to note that AI is not, replacing accountants. These aren't just robots that go in and do our job for us. That's just faster math. So it's all about scalability. It's about, being able to execute on these processes and take that time for actual analytical, activities and being able to utilize that data to drive better business decisions. So we're going to talk about this role of AI in revenue forecasting, and we can start with kind of data flow and different AI models. So what kind of information needs to be fed into an AI forecasting model if you had everything connected and properly integrated together in this perfect scenario?
In a perfect world, the funny thing is, I actually don't think it differs from what a human would need, really. So if you think about it, a human needs certain information to be able to do all of these, the revenue accounting, the revenue forecasting, and then trying to figure that out. But it really comes down to the contract data. You need to know, like, when does it start? When does it end? There's renewal information. You may have multi-year ramps. So what does that look like over time? And then you've got different terms and conditions, right? Like, is it completely standard? Are there non-standard terms? Are there areas that need to be deferred, whatever that might look like? Amendments that I talked about earlier. Any of those updates or changes to the contract also need to be shared, because every time that happens, it's going to impact obviously the forecast. Some of the other things I noted were like the project-based or usage-based type of data sets that are also needed. So I think the biggest thing here is not necessarily that the data sets would be different than what we need today. And as we know, they're always so, or not always, it's an extreme statement, they are often decentralized. And those data sets are either owned or entered by different teams. And so like that's where it becomes really hard to pull together in like sort of like that neat, timely manner. So I think, again, just I know I said it a couple times, but it's not a different data set. It's just making sure that data set is available and where all of that needs to come from to feed the AI brain behind all of the forecasting.
Yeah, I do think that's important to know is it's not that new data, it's utilizing the data that already exists at scale, identifying correlations between the data so that we can improve our processes and be more accurate with the revenue forecasting process. So there are so many unknowns and there are so many factors. What parts of forecasting do you feel like there's the most guesswork involved? Because that's another thing. If there's not new information coming in, there is that element of guesswork. But what do you see as the most amount of guesswork?
I think, yeah, and I think this is where we can leverage the AI components that will help us with this. So like first and foremost, the one I always struggled with was churn. So it fluctuates. Sometimes you have customer success teams that are super tuned into what's going on and they might know 4 to 5 months in advance. I think that's probably the anomaly. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call and someone's like, oh, I just got an email from XYZ customer. They're not going to renew next week. And it's like, and if those are sizable, that can become really impactful to the forecast, your business, all of those things. So anything that doesn't seem to follow an obvious maybe correlation to something specific that you really have insights to ahead of time can be really difficult. The other thing I think of is like macro swings. Like think about, I'm not going to make this political, but we have this macroeconomic situation in the world, and that also impacts businesses, and you can't always figure out what it is. Maybe it's even something like COVID, right? Like that was a huge unknown that had a macro impact on everything. And then renewals, which seem to be something that should be easily predictable, often have very different behaviors, but they can be found, but it's hard to monitor because maybe it's something that's geographical, maybe it's something that is tied to a specific product line, maybe, things that are not just you're not easily able to attribute or discern to a specific group, but obviously is impactful as well. So I think it's those things that you don't easily have insights into that also can come in and sort of be that surprise that we might be able to use AI for, because it can look at a broader set of that data and be able to start making some heads or tails out of the patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah, that pattern recognition and then also the action that comes out of that pattern recognition that can change how we see or what we do on either the go-to-market side or whatever it may be. I think that's a really big factor there, and that kind of leads into talking about kind of forward looking. We don't that hindsight foresight conversation. This kind of leads into looking at predictive models, which I know that's kind of our topic of today, is looking at AI with predictive analytics here. So this is going to be just like our from our conversation around traditional forecasting methods to looking at incorporating AI for more predictive forecasts. So I'm not going to read the slide off here, but essentially looking at moving from these static forecasts with maybe one talking about churn, it's not just one singular number. We're looking at patterns across different customer types and product classes. And it's not linear, it's not even one directional, it's 3D. We have with so many layers on top of each other going different directions. So being able, we don't have the human brain is amazing, but it can't do all of that, especially at scale. And so having the ability to have that benefit of AI for predictive forecast, looking at all these factors layered on together, and then continuously learning and adjusting to real-time changes based on these different factors is really key in the AI conversation here. So I'm going to ask you another question here around this. So what have you observed regarding these predictive tools? So maybe Power BI, something that's built in-house, or are there any specific tools you've seen put this into practice, or what has stood out to you?
So I have seen AI tested in reporting, and I think it's more around trying to identify the variances. So some
Yeah.
of the things that do take time today, but I haven't seen it used extensively yet for forecasting per se. I think some who are more advanced have built some small models, maybe with Python and such, but still in the early days. Um, for anybody on this call, if you have done anything more than this or that, I would love to connect with you to learn more because I'm always eager to learn about some of those. But I think the real hurdle around all of it seems to be around the data readiness of it rather than like trusting the model per se. And, or I'm sorry, the data readiness and then trusting the model because there's sort of like this, nobody wants to just hand it over and say like, oh, okay, now my forecasting is going to be done with AI. And so I think it's kind of like it's a slow building momentum, but that's why I'm like super excited that we're talking about it because it holds so much possibility that can really help. And like, this is the meat of it. This is what I'm excited about because I think that's where it's really going to start to help us all out.
Absolutely. And like you said, that the goal for AI is not to replace us or make the decision for us, but to aid in our ever evolving, data set and, making decisions based off the ever evolving data set. So thinking of a world in which we have a forecast that is automatically updated with each new data point that comes into it versus, I don't know about your previous forecasting experience, but at my previous company, it's either on a weekly basis or monthly basis. And this is not just daily, but real-time daily. And so that's a whole different ballgame than looking at a monthly, monthly actuals and forecasting based on that. We had a monthly cycle for our product P&L forecasting, and you can only do so much with especially the turnaround too. It's like you close the books,
Yeah.
this is where we're at, come, evaluate your forecast in the first couple days of the month, and then don't touch it until 4 weeks from now. And that's a big difference than from looking at this on an almost real-time basis. How do you think this discussion of looking at it real time or with dynamic forecasting could change leadership discussions?
I think that this potential is huge. I think the approach could finally be more of like this scenario-based conversation. We're always talking about how I know in the past, and then the folks that I speak to in the community are always like, now I'm expected to like figure out what my options are, like what about this scenario versus that scenario. And it's funny because we now have the more of the ability to do that. But in the past, we haven't done it because it was so difficult to model without taking all of that time. I think if you can think about things like what happens if churn rises 5%, what does the business look like? What if we focus more on something like pushing multi-year ramp deals? What will that do to the business? And so I think if we spend less time on defending the numbers and more time thinking about taking action on that and being able to drive that and then measure that piece of it, I think that's where it's really going to lead to a lot of upside for businesses. I think forecasts that act as like these living tools will help it truly be like an agent or another analyst on the team that allows the business to proactively drive change instead of just reacting to these static deliverables in hindsight.
Yeah, it's almost hard to imagine this world in which everybody's utilizing AI to its fullest in this realm, because we just haven't seen it yet. And we know that there's this capability, and we haven't even discovered the step beyond what we're talking about either, which is
Yeah.
fascinating to think about. But also kind of bringing back to the reality of our current state and situation, there is still a level of even a healthy skepticism around AI, not just with revenue forecasting, but kind of around a lot of finance and accounting functions. We're by default very, risk averse. And so adopting new technology is difficult, and getting out of our spreadsheets is difficult. But what have been some of the concerns you've seen specifically around this kind of concept of having healthy skepticism?
Love healthy skepticism. I think I'm not sure any of the things that come to mind would be a surprise to anyone, because I think we've all been so concerned and focused on the things we are concerned about. But I think there's this idea of like the idea of all of this being in a black box. Like, how can I explain the numbers? How can I defend them? Like, how is this output determined or calculated, and how can I prove that? Because at the end of the day, we all still need these to be fully auditable, and all of that needs to be available. I think there's data governance. So the idea around like what's being used and where it lives and who else might be using it. So obviously, we don't want to be uploading financial data into these open LLMs and open sourced environments. So I think there's something to just like understanding the governance behind that, and the accuracy of it. And then I think, I know everybody keeps saying like AI is not going to take over my job, but I think it is still a worry about AI replacing some jobs. But I think when you've talked to folks, at least who can understand it's not going to replace them, but change how they're going to do it, I think that's when I see us moving a little bit more toward in that maturity curve, I'll say, to move from skeptical or even healthy skepticism to curiosity, and then moving more into adoption. And I think that's when we'll start to really feel more confident and more trust in it, when we start to use it, because it'll be more like muscle memory to us, like the things we do today.
Exactly. Yeah. And I really like that kind of progression you talked about too, changing it into curiosity. We're not looking at AI as blind trust in a new technology. It is an aid. It is, again, as finance and accounting professionals, we need to worry about internal controls, auditability, like you said, data governance. There's a lot of different factors that are already top of mind, that will still need to be applied and incorporated into the adoption of AI, as opposed to, looking at it as this big, like you said, black box. We don't know how it works or what it does, but it's there, and I don't trust it. It's, we have these controls in place to be able to trust it.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Okay, so I think so we've talked about like how predictive forecasting works. But I think if we take the next step in what could happen when we actually operationalize it, I think great forecasts are pretty much useless if they kind of like live in isolation. But if we can bring in these predictive models that can connect to all of the different data sources, and be able to give our current process, or our accountants and finance professionals in the current process some time back, where you don't need to do the copy paste work. You don't need to then reconcile all of that and get past that, to then be able to continuously model and monitor the compliance, and make sure we're not, though, sacrificing anything in the meantime. And I think before we jump into this, though, so Alex and I put together, actually, I can't take credit. Alex put together this visual, but we talked about it. And I think it's interesting to even kind of like talk with you all about what we were thinking about when we were coming up with how to create a visual or illustrate this, because everybody's kind of like, well, where does predictive AI fall in, or I'm sorry, where does predictive forecasting fall within the AI realm? So you've probably heard about this generative AI, you've heard about agentic AI, and now there's this like predictive analytical AI. And so we were kind of struggling with how we could put the visual together to show where this particular topic sits within the world of AI. And so it's funny when we were looking at it, we're like, well, everybody's a little familiar with generative and with the overall, I'll say, agentic piece of it. But I think analytical, you can almost think of that as like a Venn diagram, right? Where the two worlds sort of, I'll say, collide. But that's where there's more than just, you're not just generating a financial summary. You are not just giving that output. And you are not just going and making decisions based on it, but you're taking the ability to understand and apply reason in there to be able to give those analytical insights, which I think is really interesting. And I think this actually, before we jump into, would love, based on this visual and what you all know of AI, whether it's generative, agentic, maybe analytical, and this sort of idea is a newer concept to you, but curious, I'm going to launch a poll here, but curious to see how you might think of it. So, love to see where you think do you think it stays more, is it more generative AI heavy? Is it more agentic? Do you really think it is separate as like an analytical, or do you think it's more of a combination of more than one? And it's funny, as I'm seeing these answers come in, it's not shocking. I'll share them with you here because I can see they're still coming in. But it's really interesting to me to see, and this is a spoiler alert for 10 seconds from now, but analytical AI and the combination of more than one are winning out here. And I think it's interesting. This actually even kind of shows that it's exactly what we struggled with, Alex, right? When we were coming up with that visual is it really is, and I think analytical AI is becoming a newer concept just by way of it is kind of overlapping the two in a Venn diagram between the two. And that's where I think then it also, though, it is a combination kind of all of the above. So it's really interesting to see where some of these, I'll say, accounting and finance functions sort of are ending up and where we're using them. And I think we're going to see far more of them in that analytical AI, especially to start. Like I think that's probably where I'm going to use the word safe, but the safest to start because it isn't going to be really fully owning anything, where it's taking some pieces of the generative and some of the agentic and able to help teams kind of move forward from there and use that in the best way possible.
It's an interesting conversation. Like you said, we put this polling question in here because we didn't know the answer, and we don't know if there is a set answer, because they're all these, at least in my experience, I've attended several, webinars just trying to learn more about AI and how I can apply it in my day-to-day, but also when I'm talking to prospects. And you do typically hear those two buckets of generative and agentic, and this combination of both is, I think, either it's at least new to me. I don't know if it's newer to everybody else, but very interesting conversation of, now that there is a option for a combined use of AI, like that opens up a whole different realm of what we can do, and utilize it and apply it to revenue forecasting.
Exactly. And I think that's where I think, let's just take a gut check. Like when I think of how automated maybe the current rev rec processes are, or the revenue forecasting today, like actually, I'll ask you this, Alex, just based on your experience and then also the prospects you talk to. But like, where are teams getting stuck doing things manually today? Because I think those are the ones that could be the biggest unlock.
Yeah, and it looks different for everybody, of course. I have to make that qualifier. Every industry is different. The size of the company, we talk to prospects on, more as like a, startup level, but also enterprise level. And so that's a whole different gamut of tech stack and resources available, and process documentation of what they've been doing in the past versus what's new. And maybe there's no documentation of how we do things. I know the startup world is, we're just trying to just keep our feet under us. And so when it comes to levels of automation now, yeah, I see the whole realm. I see people that are doing everything in spreadsheets, even order entry. There are some companies that are, I know, I see that look on your face, and it is that is not the fun place to be in. We need some level of systematizing our processes and automation even before maybe getting to the AI conversation. But then also see, enterprise level companies who have been using the same platforms for a long time and haven't really diverged from it. And so it might not be necessarily they're doing manual order entry, but they're doing some manual processes to supplement these bigger, tools that they're using, where maybe AI can be incorporated there. I know, especially on the revenue recognition side, I see people utilizing their ERP for just basic AR subledger, or revenue subledger work, and maybe even posting journal entries. But there are these complexities to revenue recognition, especially when we get into, like we've talked about, ASC 606 SSP allocations and multi-element arrangements, where those their current processes, or the process they've been doing for forever, don't really stand up to or can't handle some of the newer product offerings that bring these complications and these complexities to revenue recognition. So over time, these bigger companies have been around a long time, start having this spreadsheet here and this manual process here, and it starts to add up. And that's where I can see a huge opportunity for this. And I guess that's a little bit more on the recognition side as opposed to the forecasting side, but I see the same in the forecasting side as well.
Yeah, and that's what I'm seeing too. And as I'm speaking with different teams, I think there's a forecasting engine that exists, but it's oftentimes disconnected from either the systems that hold the data. It's again that disparate system or disparate data in different systems problem. So all the teams are spending their time consolidating, often manually, and reconciling all of that. And so the same kind of exists. And so knowing that though, and thinking about leading into like it really leads into like where should we start, right? Like if you think about automation and AI, what do you see as like the biggest return for order to cash teams? Because I think that's where, if you have something that's low risk but high reward, or high impact, that's where we're going to want to start. But curious from your perspective where you kind of see that.
Yeah, I think that it would, honestly, it starts internally and asking yourself and your team, where are we seeing the most pain right now? What's the biggest pain point in our revenue processes? And that could be, we want faster time to close. Closing the books takes all of this extra time. We're spending all of this time putting together all of the data and compiling, and we don't have enough time to actually deliver insights or do that variance analysis at the end of the month. So maybe it's speed. It could be accuracy. I know that a lot. I gave my example of not refreshing that one pivot table. And there's things are prone for error when we do come across some of these challenges. And so if that's higher on the pain list or the priority list, then accuracy might be one. We can talk about everything from, overloading our teams of too many, or overloading the work on our teams. I know that especially bigger companies have, unfortunately, rounds of restructuring and layoffs that condense the teams, but the work doesn't change. There's still the same amount of people, and, we're running into issues with that's also kind of tied into the speed and time to close, because there's just so many tasks to accomplish, especially when you have more manual processes. So there's a whole combination of things. I'd be curious to see, I think we have our last polling question that we can launch here. What do you see as the biggest benefits to automating that order to cash process? I named a couple of them, but it could be combinations of both as well. It might not be easy to pick one. But I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks of this question as well.
All right, so I feel like we get the benefit of seeing it first, which is nice.
Yes.
Um,
Do you have a preference? Is there one that comes to mind for you?
I think I could probably justify something across any of them. I think though right now, for me personally, my day-to-day speed is definitely one of them, just because I think I feel like I could use 20 extra hours in a day, and that's just not feasible. But I think that's where we're heading. And so I think, this is definitely something where I think we can shift in kind of any of these, right? Like we're becoming more efficient. And so it becomes more about productivity and not necessarily, again, not replacing anybody, but making all of us a lot more effective and giving us the ability to spend a lot more time on strategic initiatives and being able to shift how we work as opposed to um, spending time actually putting all of this together. So I know in the interest of time, we're trying to, kind of get through everything, and we want to be able to talk about everything, but wanted to shift quickly just about thinking about dynamic dashboards, because I think it goes from reporting where you're pulling the numbers together, but having dynamic views on what this is and kind of like thinking about how we can shift this in the way that we can take the numbers and not have them living in reports and think of them more as financial narratives. So I think about like changing it from like, here's what changed and why, to here are the options or actions we can take, and these are the indicators to help support that direction that we took. So I think that's where it's writing the story for us, and maybe that's more the generative side. Who knows, going back to that view, but I think there's something there to help explain things, why revenue is trending up or down, and pulling drivers for predictive models as opposed to just like it changed by X and here's why I think Y. Instead, it's shifting it to this is what happened, here's why it changed by that, and here's what we need to do about it, which I think will really be able to shift everything. Um,
Yeah,
so
that extra
if
step, I think, is at least from what I've been seeing, is not where a lot of companies are not there yet because we are spending
yeah,
so much time generating the numbers themselves and then doing the variance analysis on what changed why the drivers, which takes up a lot of time as well because it's just an added layer. And then we've spent all of our time generating that, doing that, and then it doesn't leave a lot of room left for making the actionable change. So I think that was I wanted to emphasize that point.
yeah, I know. And I think that's where this is probably a great, like, where we have all of our sort of like insights from today. But if we think about what it actually means for finance teams and how you're going to be doing it, forecasting isn't going to be about reconciliation and accuracy alone anymore. It's going to be more about like the agility. It's not, did we hit the number? But more about how fast can we implement this change and how quickly can we see the results and what do we want to do about it? Do we want to continue doing that? And so I think that's really the power of predictive forecasting. It doesn't roll off the tongue. We got to, maybe it'll be called
It
like PF
doesn't.
or something in the future. um, but I think if we first and foremost think of it as shifting from forecast to strategy, right? Like we talked about, the forecast process is less about, or will become less about what happened and that backward looking approach to moving, and that was more like explaining misses. But I think if we can turn that around and we're making it more into those actionable insights, what can we do, what can we model in advance, so when leadership does go to the board, it's less about postmortem and what happened, and instead they can spend the time really figuring out the levers to pull to project and get the business to really grow. So I think having that modeling ability will change the tone of the entire conversation. Then if we think about like building trust in AI, so leadership buy-in matters. There needs to be a focus on what helps executives actually trust these AI-driven forecasts. I think there's definitely something to the accuracy piece, but if we can show and prove that the accuracy is actually going to improve over time because you're not spending all of your time or introducing additional errors by copy paste, formulas being overridden or missing updated data set or forgetting to, not to throw you under the bus there, but
I did it to
forgetting
myself.
to, I was gonna say, forgetting to refresh a pivot table, stuff like that. But that's going to help the executives really understand where there's a true benefit there. I think also just incorporating like confidence intervals in there. There's like probability ranges you can implement. Like a lot of tools that I'm getting to know have confidence scores. So that it really shows like the areas where you still need a human in the loop because we're not just turning it over. We're not just saying, okay, AI, take our forecasting. Instead, it's putting us in the spot to be able to like take and understand those numbers and do something with them. So we're not just going to hand it over. You're still going to have reviews and approvals, all of the things that you need. And then finally, the power of the what if scenarios. This is like, I know I keep saying it, but it really is like, it's so impactful to be able to model some of these things. Like if you could say, okay, what would a 5% increase to renewal rates look like? Or what would happen if we could reduce churn by 2%? Or what happens if we lose 2% more? Like, what does that start to look like? Or even being able to predict and incorporate some of those macroeconomic shifts that we talked about, whether it's changes in interest rates or FX impacts, whatever those things are. But I think being able to mitigate the risk, but still be able to truly leverage and embrace the strategic planning aspects of it will be very impactful, really huge. We talked about like being able to take some steps along the way. Curious from your perspective if you have any insights on like what is like a small step or the next thing everybody listening should do to sort of take this on, start with the AI forecasting.
Yes, I know if anyone's like me on the call, like this, the gears start turning. You're like, oh my gosh, I can apply this here. I can apply this here. I can think about a different way to do this here. But really, it's let's, you always hear the term don't boil the ocean. We have pick one metric. Maybe it is churn. We talked about that. And the what if that can come from evaluating that one metric. And applying this, whether it's generative, agentic, analytical, some type of AI model to it to be able to start driving some of those insights and look at things differently. So I know that we're coming up on time here. Did want to thank everybody for attending. If anything, sparked some ideas or made you realize that, there's some processes that could evolve, Em and I are always open to connect with you on having those conversations and learning more about how to apply AI in your day-to-day roles and businesses. We're here to help you explore that. And just as a reminder, kind of back to housekeeping, bringing it full circle, if you did, earn the CPE credit, that will be emailed out after we get off of this Zoom today. But really appreciate you spending this hour with us. I know I had a great time. Thank you for joining me. And I hope that everybody has a great rest of your day. There will be one quick feedback survey at the end of this call. I would encourage you to please fill it out, and have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. And thank you all. This was fun. Take care.